The Boys were a tag team signed to Ring of Honor and AEW, made up of brothers Brent and Brandon Tate, and they mainly performed in Ring of Honor and were around in Ring of Honor pre-Tony Khan and returned to the brand when Tony Khan bought the company. The Boys were aligned with Dalton Castle and a key part of the act, and leading up to Supercard of Honor, they were involved in the middle of a storyline between Dalton Castle and Johnny TV, and during this feud, there was a match stipulation where if Johnny won, the Boys would belong to him. Johnny of course won, and the Boys would start coming out with Johnny TV and Tyre, but on the go home show to Supercard, it was randomly announced that the Boys were gone as they had been eaten by bears. Okay? And then out of nowhere, it was announced that the Boys, along with many other AEW talent, were released. And the Boys being released was surprising due to the fact that they were in the midst of a storyline and were just abruptly written off of it. But the pot would stir even further when on the media call after Supercard of Honor, Tony Khan was asked about the circumstances leading to the Boys' release and said that they were released due to no showing multiple shows. Which at first hearing you think is probably an understandable reason to release them, but the Boys had a different idea what happened and released a statement that, to give a too long didn't read, they refuted a lot of what Tony Khan said and mentioned they were cut due to budget cuts, and that the no showings that Tony Khan referred to was an incident where they had been booked flights from an airport further away from the one local to them, and when they tried to get it changed and tried to get it fixed, there was a lack of communication from AEW's part, and the Boys never ended up on the show, and it wasn't their fault that they no-showed. And also loads of screenshots of text with seemingly an AEW travel agent were also posted along with it as evidence. I'll leave all of this thread linked down below. Tony Khan would then respond by saying he's open to working with the Boys again, but stands by what he said and cited past issues he had been told about and his own experience with regards to the no-showing as to why they were released, and if their tweets are any indication, the Boys don't seem to agree with that statement either. And despite Tony Khan saying he'd work with them again, I'd probably predict that we won't be seeing the Boys on Ring of Honor or AEW again. The Boys are now involved in a lawsuit against AEW alongside former Ring of Honor commentator Kevin Kelly. The Tate twins allege that Tony Khan's comments about how they no-showed events were defamatory, and the suit seeks to void the arbitration clause of their talent contracts in AEW, and they aim to have the court certify a class action lawsuit against AEW over claims the company is misclassifying its wrestlers as independent contractors rather than employees. And next up is Kevin Kelly, a former announcer for AEW and Ring of Honor who you might have heard me mention is also involved in the same lawsuit with the Boys and AEW. As Kevin Kelly is a long-time wrestling commentator, he's worked for Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling pre-AEW, pre-Tony Khan's Ring of Honor, and he would join AEW's commentary team in 2023, being part of the Collision commentary team. However, after just less than a year in the commentary booth, he was fired from AEW on March 8, 2024 following a social media tirade the week before, in which he'd accused his colleague and fellow AEW and Ring of Honor announcer Ian Riccoboni of libel and attempted career sabotage, apparently over Kelly's support of the Sound of Freedom movie, accusing Riccoboni of being the reason why he was off AEW TV, and of course this would lead to Kevin Kelly getting fired from All Elite Wrestling. And sure enough, like I said, he would go ahead and join the Boys to file a lawsuit against AEW and AEW's owner Tony Khan, as on top of the terms of that lawsuit I previously discussed, Kelly had also filed a lawsuit for monetary damages from AEW and Riccoboni for breach of contract, defamation, and causing him to be unable to find work, and this court case is still ongoing. Next up is Jake Atlas, who looked to be up next in the wrestling business and a huge prospect, but he was abruptly fired from WWE before being picked up by AEW, before being fired very quickly due to a very serious incident and arrest. In 2016, Jake Atlas made his wrestling debut, and for the next couple of years he would make his mark on the independent scene, wrestling for the likes of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, Beyond Wrestling, Warrior Wrestling, PWG, GCW, and Ring of Honor. On October 23rd, 2019, Jake Atlas would sign with the WWE for the NXT brand. It was his big break. However, I think it's fair to say that his WWE run was very uneventful. Jake mainly wrestled in the Cruiserweight division and on 205 Live, with his biggest match being against Santos Escobar for the Cruiserweight title, which he lost. And on August 6, 2021, after just under 2 years in the WWE, Jake Atlas was released from his contract as part of a round of budget cut releases. Following his WWE release, he'd wrestled for GCW and Ring of Honor in September 2021, but shortly after, he announced his retirement from wrestling. But nobody retires in wrestling, and 3 months later, Jake Atlas was back. He appeared on AEW Dark in December, coming out of retirement and defeating Serpentico, and then on the January 7th edition of AEW Rampage, Jake Atlas would face Adam Cole in a match. He would lose the match, but he was announced as being all elite after the show. Jake Atlas was back, and in a big way. Unfortunately for him though, he got injured in this match, suffering a knee injury that would leave him out for most of a year. And even more unfortunately was that only a few months into his injury, controversy would call. As on May 3rd, 2022, Jake Atlas was arrested after his boyfriend called the police on him. Atlas had reportedly scratched his boyfriend and tore his tank top during an argument over a sexual encounter. Jake Atlas was charged with misdemeanor domestic battery, and Jake Atlas, in a tweet that no longer exists, apologized for his actions and said that he was under the influence when it happened, and says though that does not excuse his behavior, he has been attending an alcohol abuse treatment program for the past 7 years, and he intends to continue. The charges were later dropped, but a video of the arrest was released showing the footage from the police's POV, showing Jake Atlas pull the I'm famous card, call his boyfriend a nobody, a bitch ass, and said that he was bad at sex. It's an uncomfortable video. Jake Atlas' contract finished with AEW, who had no intention to re-sign him in October 2022, and he has not been involved in wrestling since. Next up is Jimmy Havoc, who at the time he was signed to AEW was known as one of the most prolific deathmatch wrestlers in all of wrestling. He was an OG AEW signing, but he was fired and left the wrestling business as a whole after allegations were made about him during the Speaking Out movement in 2020. Born in Dartford, Kent in 1984, Jimmy Havoc began his wrestling career in 2004 as he trained at NWA UK Hammerlock, a wrestling school he attended alongside names like Zack Sabre Jr. and Finn Balor. He made his debut that same year and would wrestle exclusively for NWA UK, and the first couple of years of his career started out slow, but in 2006 he would wrestle a match that would change the course of his wrestling career, as in 2006 he made his first appearances for other promotions outside of NWA UK, wrestling for the promotion Triple X, where he would take part in his first ever death match. A death match, if you don't know, is a wrestling match where it's more than just your average hardcore match. It's a match where the two guys in it are quite literally looking like they're trying to kill each other. Hence the name Deathmatch, and it includes much crazier spots and moments and much more graphic violence than your run-of-the-mill Extreme Rules match. And Jimmy Havoc would become very prevalent in the deathmatch wrestling scene very quickly, and soon was traveling to other countries to wrestle in death matches. He'd wrestle for Westside Extreme Wrestling in Germany, a hardcore promotion there. He'd take part in CZW's European Tournament of Death as well in the coming years. CZW, aka Combat Zone Wrestling, if you weren't aware, were the premier hardcore / deathmatch promotion in the 2000s in the US. And every year they held the Tournament of Death, which was easily the biggest deathmatch tournament in wrestling, to the point they made a European version of the tournament, which Jimmy would compete in numerous times throughout the 2010s. And it wouldn't be too long until Jimmy Havoc was wrestling for CZW in America and winning the Tournament of Death there, which he did so in 2017. All the while throughout the 2010s, Jimmy Havoc would go on to become one of the biggest names in the BritRes scene, as he made his debuts for Progress and Insane Championship Wrestling in 2012, which were two of the biggest promotions in the country for the time. And he'd of course win numerous titles across numerous promotions, including also for What Culture Pro Wrestling, who he debuted for in 2016, which was the same year he debuted for TNA and had a short run with them. And basically what I'm saying is, by the time 2019 and AEW's formation came around, Jimmy Havoc had had an accomplished independent wrestling career, and was coming into AEW with a reputation as being a deathmatch guy. and fans were interested to see how a deathmatch guy like Jimmy Havoc would do in a brand new major company. He made his AEW debut at Double or Nothing 2019, their first ever show, as he was in the Casino Battle Royale, where he made it to the Final Four before being eliminated in what was a decent first showing on a major pay-per-view. He next wrestled in a 4-way match against Adam Page, Jungle Boy, and MJF, won by Adam Page at Fyter Fest, the story being that all these guys were in the Battle Royal and had also confronted each other at Double or Nothing later on in that show. And then at Fight for the Fallen, he teamed with Darby Allin and Joey Janela in a loss to Shawn Spears, MJF, and Sammy Guevara, losing the match as himself, Darby Allin, and Janela just couldn't coexist, and this would lead to a match between the three at All Out, a 3-way Cracker Barrel brawl which saw Jimmy Havoc pick up his first win in AEW, and what felt like a big one. And the match itself was good too, with the stipulation of the match suiting all three guys' styles. His next appearance for AEW wouldn't come until a couple months later, until AEW Dynamite had officially begun on the air, as he wrestled on Dynamite Episode 2 in October 2019 in a world title #1 contenders match against Darby Allin, where he was defeated by Darby. And then after this, Jimmy Havoc would mostly become a fixture of AEW Dark, as it seems as though his deathmatch style had meant his usage on AEW Weekly TV was limited. It may have also been a punishment for an incident he got into that saw him get into a fight with Excalibur right in front of Tony Khan during Tony Schiavone's birthday party. Yes, I know that sounds fake, but this actually happened, with Excalibur reportedly coming out the victor, choking out Jimmy Havoc in front of party goers. And whilst he was active in picking up wins farming Dark, his next Dynamite appearance wasn't until March 2020, when he appeared to be defeated by Cody Rhodes. He then had another match 4 weeks later on Dynamite in a loss to Orange Cassidy, as he started a feud with the Best Friends alongside a new teammate he had aligned himself with, fellow Brit Kip Sabian, as these two would dub themselves the Superbad Squad, joined by Penelope Ford as well. They were defeated by Best Friends in their first match as a team, but would start picking up wins on Dark and would earn themselves a #1 contendership match, which they would have in May of 2020 facing SCU, and they would pick up the win here, as the Superbad Squad were now the #1 contenders for the AEW World Tag Team titles, and they would challenge champions Kenny Omega and Adam Page the next week for the titles, but no surprises, they would fall short. Their next match as a team on Dynamite was 2 weeks later, when they would face yet another top team in AEW, as they were also defeated by the Young Bucks. Despite the losses though, it looked as though the Superbad Squad were there to stay and a new team for AEW. However, this match with the Young Bucks would actually end up being the team's last ever match, and this was because, in fact, it ended up being Jimmy Havoc's last ever match, as in June 2020 and the coming months afterwards, many pro wrestlers were accused of abuse and misconduct in a movement known as the Speaking Out movement. This movement saw many prominent wrestlers be exposed and accused of abuse and misconduct across many top promotions and independent wrestling. One of the wrestlers who was named in the Speaking Out movement was Jimmy Havoc, as Jimmy Havoc was accused by a former partner of emotional abuse. She alleged that in the 3 years they were together, she experienced him scream at her, threaten self-harm in front of her, and verbally abuse her. She also shared an account from another woman who claimed to be actually assaulted by Jimmy Havoc whilst they were together. After these allegations came out, people obviously demanded a response from AEW and Jimmy Havoc, as these were very serious allegations. And a couple of days later, we would get a response from AEW, as they would respond with a Notes app screenshot that read, "We wish Jimmy Havoc all the best as he receives treatment and counseling in an effort to overcome the mental health and substance abuse challenges in his life. We are aware of various reports related to Jimmy. We are evaluating his status with our company and will address it when he has successfully completed his rehabilitation." AEW in this tweet only referenced the allegations in one sentence, but it's obvious that this was a response and clearly done in response to the allegations. And after this, it was radio silence for a bit from AEW and Jimmy Havoc, as Jimmy Havoc was never seen on AEW TV again or programming at all, as he was presumably, as AEW said, continuing on with his counseling while they evaluated his status with the company. It was radio silence all the way up until August 14th, 2020, when he was released by AEW. And since being released by AEW, it has once again been nothing but radio silence from Jimmy Havoc. Jimmy Havoc to this day has never responded to the allegations made against him or released any statement of any kind or even said a word about anything. We haven't heard a word from Jimmy Havoc. And Jimmy Havoc has never been seen again in any other wrestling company, with him never coming back to wrestling and never being seen in the ring since. And since it has been nearly 5 years since we've seen or heard from Jimmy Havoc at this point, I doubt we ever see or hear from him ever again in professional wrestling. Jimmy Havoc's AEW run lasted just over a year, and in the end a whole lot of nothing kinda happened in it, as it seemed as though his deathmatch style just didn't translate into an American weekly TV wrestling show, and based on the allegations, Jimmy Havoc was just as sadistic outside the ring. Next up is Ivelisse, who was fired from AEW and ruined her chances of ever returning there due to her conduct that took place during a live episode of AEW Dynamite for everyone to see. Ivelisse Velez began training to be a wrestler at age 15 in Puerto Rico, debuting in the World Wrestling Council in the year of 2004. In March of 2011, Ivelisse Velez was announced as one of the 14 contestants for the 5th season of WWE Tough Enough. She came 7th in the show after she was forced to withdraw from injury. Up until that point, Ivelisse had not been included in the bottom 3 for any of the episodes and had been doing pretty well in the series. But despite not winning, Ivelisse was signed by the WWE in November 11th, 2011 and assigned to FCW, where she would debut under the name of Sophia Cortez. And when FCW rebranded to NXT, she was there as well. She made her NXT TV debut on the July 4th episode of NXT on 2012, defeating Paige of all people on her debut. She even wrestled main roster member Natalya on the July 25th episode of NXT. But then in August of 2012, she announced that she'd been released from her contract. She claimed she was released because she was one of the first people to talk about Bill DeMott's misconduct and reported it to the office. And following her release, Ivelisse would become a stalwart and a workhorse of the independent scene, wrestling for numerous companies throughout America and the world. She wrestled for TNA, AAA, Shine, various independent wrestling promotions, and of course, in 2014, she debuted for Lucha Underground. And Ivelisse had a very successful career in Lucha Underground. She was a 2-time trios champion after teaming up with Angelico and Son of Havoc, and had overall a really great career in the company. However, something that had irked Ivelisse her entire career was her backstage attitude, and it's something that really halted her career and hurt her prospects, and that especially came into play in All Elite Wrestling. Ivelisse debuted for AEW in 2019 and was eventually signed to a contract for the company. She actually had a bit of early success as she was part of the Women's Tag Team Cup in 2020, where her and Diamante were the winners of the tournament. Herself and Diamante defeated the Nightmare Sisters on the August 22, 2020 episode of AEW Dynamite. On the September 11, 2020 episode of AEW Dynamite, Ivelisse would challenge Thunder Rosa for the NWA Women's World Championship, and this is the match where everything went to pot. In this match, you can see Ivelisse visibly annoyed with Thunder Rosa and no selling her offense. Following this, there was obviously a load of backstage drama between Thunder Rosa and Ivelisse was essentially relegated to dark. In fact, she only wrestled once more on Dynamite following this. That was until she was released from AEW in April of 2021. Ivelisse blames Thunder Rosa for dragging her name through the mud backstage and backstage politics as the reason why she was released from AEW. And she also claims that the no-selling and the shoot fight that they had in their match was Thunder Rosa's fault after she forgot what spots were going to happen, and that led to the fight. She stated the following on an interview with Chris Van Vliet. When the day came, she didn't want to do anything. I'm like, what? No, this match will be awesome, but I'm also trying to knock it out the park. Even at the start with the slap, we went over that 1 million times. We knew. She forget what comes after. I had no choice but to nudge her face. That's when the shoot stuff happened. I trained MMA, you can't pull that on me. I just didn't want to allow that negativity. I didn't want to be pulled into that. She tried and tried though. Also, I was already signed. Why would I do that? Somehow, I was made into the bad guy though. There is nothing that can be done about that. But the bigger issue is not understanding what kind of an asset I could be. Since her release from AEW, Ivelisse wrestles far less than what she used to wrestle on the independent scene, transferring her time between Mexico and the US, wrestling for various promotions between the two, but once again is nowhere near as active as she used to be. Ironically enough, a year or two later, Thunder Rosa would get into her own controversy for allegedly sandbagging in a match, which caught her heat from the rest of the AEW women's locker room. And finally, there's Ryan Nemeth, as the former Wingman member has also got himself in a lawsuit with AEW, and somehow, someway, CM Punk is also involved too. And it all kicked off last year after a complaint that Ryan Nemeth made to AEW HR about CM Punk was leaked online. We all know the story of CM Punk and AEW, I don't need to go over it again. But as we know, he had issues with many people in AEW, one of those people being Ryan Nemeth, the brother of Dolph Ziggler, who worked for AEW for a couple of years, and Ryan Nemeth would constantly take shots at Punk on social media, and this would lead to a confrontation between the two at June 21st, 2023 Dynamite, where Punk and Nemeth began speaking, and Punk allegedly asked Nemeth if they need to take this outside, and quizzed him on his tweets about him. However, reportedly Nemeth said his tweets about him were just in character and apologized, and the two shook hands, and all seemed well up until the August 13th collision, where Ryan Nemeth would turn up to the taping only to be sent home because Punk didn't want him there. Both men departed AEW shortly after, and now a document from September 2023 after both those incidents took place that Ryan Nemeth sent to AEW HR and executives was just leaked. In the document, he claims to have been mistreated by Punk, and when he came to AEW with his concerns, he was ignored by them. The document shows claims of AEW threatening legal action over the situation, and he alleges AEW told him to antagonize CM Punk in a promo. He talks about his belief that he was held responsible for Punk's firing, and that he was also offered a settlement worth about 3 years of his salary if he signed an NDA. And interestingly enough, he says that whilst the AEW locker room is full of good people, he doesn't necessarily blame CM Punk for his issues and the issues that happened in AEW. I'll leave the full link to the document down below. There's a lot of interesting stuff on there. AEW have yet to comment on it, nor has Ryan Nemeth to my belief, and I assume that everyone will just kind of move on from this. It's a leaked document that was probably never meant to come out, I imagine. It's a lot of stuff that was already known, but there are some interesting tidbits in there and some insights into how AEW operates and what happened during CM Punk's time in AEW and his drama with Ryan Nemeth. And overall, my thoughts are, this document is from September 2023, it's now December 2024, we're less than a few weeks away from 2025, let's all just move on. It appears as though Nemeth's issues were more so the handling of the incidents with Punk than the incidents themselves. But again, we don't need to talk about this anymore. CM Punk in AEW feels like light years ago at this point.